Yo, welcome everybody. Welcome to another Hardstyle album review. Once again, middle of nowhere, in the very peaceful nature of Finland, where it's a good place to reflect and think about things when it's so tranquil and peaceful. But nevertheless, welcome to the video. This time I will be reviewing an album called Rest in Pieces from Warface, and it was truly a captivating peek to what Warface has been doing throughout several years of his production, and I'm honored to actually give it a little bit more of a retrospective look to how the album was received and what I thought about it, and just other technical breakdown of the album in general. So here we go. So I actually ended up writing a Substack article, so if you want to go read it, click it there. This will be kind of off the cuff, but also reading the script, so it'll be pre-scripted quite heavily at sections. So Warface has become quite a unique prospect in refining his skills and how he has taken shape in hardstyle creation over the years. As a result, this one has turned out to be quite a gemstone after chipping away at it for more than half a decade. Thinking about how long Yuri and his ghost producer have been doing stuff together, it's quite amazing that they're still cracking on and finding new stuff. This album was a captivating peek at the current state of raw style. I found this album to be quite a mixed bag of goodies. Lots to cling on to and cherish, but there's also a few outright misses on the record. I have had a lot of time to reflect and to see how good the album has aged throughout time, and how it has aged against other revered artist output. Many of my initial thoughts, key reflections and observations were formed in the first few months after this album came out, and after getting to hear it live in DEFCON 1 2023. This is a rock solid record of various takes in rawness in hardstyle. The first track, Down to Earth. This song serves well as an intro track for the album, providing a generously loud anticlimax with the elements to cling on to, characterized by its chirping, crisp kicks alongside with heavy, odd, wavy synth sounds. The melody on the song is quite simple in many ways, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. Simpler melodies are more effective to capture the energy. I think philosophically, simpler melodies are easier to learn and repeat, which is beneficial for first-time listeners as well as festival goers where people hum the melody. I think this track's break felt a little disconnected from the rest of the song by analyzing the emphasis both on the climaxes compared to the break and the build-up phase. It seems that track was crammed together to finish, so the break just got less emphasis, because at the end of the day, people don't really care about the break. It's all about how high the drops are, how insane the drops are, how lovely the melody is. But the break is what actually is the lowest denominator in the track, so it literally raises the bar on the entire song if you actually put some more thought into the break. The singing feels a little bit out of place. It might be an attempt to recapture the energy for the final climax. The lyrics' energy was lacking, and it's unclear what they were attempting to create. It's a risky endeavor to retain little to no energy from the melody to carry with vocals. I think it sort of metaphorically halves the song into two separate portions whenever there's no strong link up in between. I love the anticlimax, particularly the way it introduces some very weird metallic pipe clinging sounds. Those are really cool effects. I love that. This type of sound is refreshingly novel. It creates a cool dynamic where the metallic sounds versus the bass heavy notes come from different directions, and it's artistically It's quite elaborate, I would say, and for music nerds, that's a thumbs up. And whenever they come from different directions, you can have 3D visualization of how it pans around in the listener's ears. That's very cool effect. It creates a very sort of loopy and trippy sound stage. I admit it's hard to make distinct alterations within an anticlimax. Most of your options are quite limited to like chops or triplets or pitch changes. There's not like whole heaps of new stuff that you could actually do to actually retain some sort of form throughout. The final climax is not particularly interesting. It doesn't have depth to stand out. It somewhat blends in and slightly drowns out the noise of the track, but it's still very enjoyable and technically flawless in terms of the kick. A good opener track, I would say. Alright, next song, Levitate. I would describe this collaboration with Adjust as a disoriented mess that could have been so much more. The track is all over the place with vastly differing fake drops, effects, screeches, and as well as old school kicks, to name a few. It was almost like a stitched together, half delusionary manner to actually like cram so much stuff into one. It's a very chaotic. Nevertheless, I'm still able to see the value of this track as a bit more of an uncaged artistic expression. This approach makes them more capable of pursuing new material and broadening their artistic vision in terms of direction. For example, the second half of the final climax, the song delivers a well hollowed out gated kick that sort of loops around very nicely. If you want to check it out, it's at 1 minute and 20 seconds in, and there's a anticlimactic, slow, bass-heavy section with looming kicks that is quite nice. I think some of the kicks are a little bit reminiscent of black holes with an odd pitch. The rest of the kicks were quite hard to get a consensus or a opinion on, as they were buried with muddy bass, so they weren't quite as distinct. I did not like the final climax kicks. They were a little bit mundane, middle of the pack, and inconsequential. However, I didn't mind the melodies, and they were done pretty well. This track is quite harsh on the first listen. I didn't end up liking the chaotic noise of the vocalist. Iris Goes, or the way she was utilized on this track, it's sort of artificial, fake rage. It's a little bit inauthentic. The sort of scream is a little bit hard to digest if you're not in the mood. The vocals seem a little overemphasized, serve more as an ear candy for sectioning the track's pacing and the sort of linking up stuff together. I think that's not really a good way to craft a song, but that's just me. To be fair, they were powerful enough to serve the purpose, but overly represented in my opinion. Decent song, but it's not like something that you would put on a lot of time or something that you would play a few years later, like now. Alright, next track, Skyfall. This track boasts a captivating melody, introduced by simple yet effective vocals. Unlike on the last song, in many ways it evokes this sort of essence of popular mainstream electronic music without the negative connotations. What I mean by that is like it's a very clean production, sort of like pristine, radio ready production without sharp edges or very odd synth sounds that are sort of sharp and very distorted in the sort of harsh ways. It's sort of clean and pristine, And it's a little bit reminiscent of the production style that Medusa, for example, has. This track features a moderate harshness on its kicks. It's not all out there, bass slam to the face. It still has a lot of nuance, but it's a little bit tamed and caged. This first anticlimax feels a little bit flat and uneventful. True, it's still executed with technical precision, featuring caved out kicks with dense bass tails. The main climax is similarly underwhelming. It lacks distinctive elements and it fails to introduce any variations that would ignite significant interest. The final climax is exceedingly harsh and stands out from the rest of the track. I'm not particularly fond of pinging sensations in the kicks, where the kicks sort of ping off the limiter, because you sort of like hit it, but it's sort of like you need to cap it out with the sort of dry distortion and wet distortion. It's just sort of maxed out, but there's different types of ways of maxing out the limiter that doesn't sound harsh. And it's kind of a cool concept that you can sort of ping it off in sort of very bright and crisp way, pinging it off. There's also like this harshness that could have been done, where you slam the kick so hard that it crashes out and it just sounds scattery and sort of bad. But this one is sort of like whenever it like clicks and pings, the pinging sensation actually is like it goes to zero, but it's sort of like a very gradual zero. It's not like a harsh cap. The sort of pinging of the limiter is somewhat echoey still, because the tail of the ping sort of still resonates throughout. I think that they lack a little bit of character and finesse, but however the real impact comes after the anticlimax with saw wave full kicks that sound much better and clearer, even though they're louder than the anticlimax ones. An additional saw bass tail and meticulously EQ'd greatly enhance the quality and somewhat valiantly rescuing this track from mediocrity. This track offers a little that I found like extremely compelling, and something that would actually distinguish it from other average tracks. The key characteristics that would make this track stand out are few and far between. There is something a little bit unsettling about the track's tactical nature. It is too closely strung together with limited emphasis on the breaks once again. The sort of dynamic is not quite wide enough. It's sort of a little bit too condensed. It's almost like a song that is designed to be drop mixed live. I might be mistaken, but the lack of graduality is distinctly noticeable and makes this track less enjoyable on repeated listens or even occasional playthroughs. It fails to spark much intrigue. I found myself in an impasse. It's not particularly remarkable, even for like a middle of the pack type of track. But regardless, there's a lot of things to enjoy about this track. Alright, the next song called Taste the Blade. I personally adore this track's execution. It features a wicked synthetic blend of old school characteristics in synths that retain the vibes found in trance, for example, the electronic dance music genre. What makes this track so infectious is, in addition to its phenomenal fake drops and distinctive kicks that are highly radiant, this sort of anticlimactic drops enhance the rushing sensation of being slammed by a wall of bass waves, with a fast bridge leading right into the first real climax, which consists of kicks with prevailing, chirping, high-pitched, triplet-esque choppiness, loops in a very cool way. Sort of break the form of the regular repeatedness, and you add some odd cuts here and there. It adds so much more depth to the song. These kicks quickly fade out to avoid becoming too irritable, so it's sort of appetizer, like boom, we bring you a little bit of this, but we sort of have to take it away because it will become dull if you like have that for like, let's say, over 45 seconds. In an unusual way, I would describe this track as a massive opener. It seems like a daunting task to transition from this old school underground aesthetic to pure raw style. A genius move to take listener by surprise. Clever craftsmanship from Warface once again. They did not hold back with the first anticlimax true kicks. At first I had a distaste for this wavering madness of room-filling eardrum destruction. After letting the album simmer for more than a year, I would say, I desensitized my hearing so much and everything becomes so dull and my dopamine receptors became so fried that these days I love the sound of this type of music. I couldn't even conceive of myself getting this type of music like 5 years ago, but you never know where life takes you. I love this track, I have to say. The first climax kicks were presented in a manner that gave me pure amusement even after several listens. I found the track's mid-intro development was actually engaging for once. This was partially achieved by rebuilding a long phase break to emphasize the massive impact that both climaxes create. In the final climax, I am uncertain whether the kicks have a higher perceived loudness than this one. It's insane how much distortion you can fit in. They are like full-on swoops of low-end pressure with a majestic tick to make them loop over. And let me quote the lyrics here. When the bass stops, my heart stops. I would conclude by saying that this track is an exceptional conception and execution that encapsulates a superb hybrid synthetic blends of various styles, from trance aesthetic to the madness of anticlimactic dryness, contrasted with the maximally powerful bass that bombards you in the final climax. 10 out of 10. Next song, Flying High. This track was one of the reasons that I became intrigued about uptempo, funnily enough, and the unconventional raw direction that this song takes. This track together culminated with Ruler's explosive popularity in 2023 and 2024, making this track a classic for the summer festival season. Walking around any campsites, this song often comes to mind, being blasted out of some cheap Bluetooth speaker where the bass cracks by some drunken Germans. This track is undeniably futuristic in some sense, even extravagant in some of its execution. I had a hard time digesting this strange blend of euphoria. There's something to be said about the overlap of glistening, overly joyful, drug-induced, euphoric, and childish playfulness of the melody that it has on its breaks. Then, as a counterbalance, is the vastly opposing contrast of the anger-filled kicks and its anticlimaxes, where the bass is seemingly strung apart, lapping it and waving it back and forth so harshly. Truly a great execution of fusion of styles, with Ruler playing a significant role in this collaboration. In several ways, I feel like this track is fun to listen to. The melody doesn't feel forced or basic, and it has the right amount of emphasis throughout the track. I experienced a tasteful, bittersweet tidbits of pure bass treats on this track. The track has stood the test of time, I must admit. Even after multiple revisits, the track stands out from the other tracks on the record. The final climax managed to be wildly raw, almost in a surprising sense. It is so unextraordinary to run into such weird but attractive sound waves that could be characterized almost as white noise, combined with those wavy, looping vocal chops that retain the track's flow. The vocal lap perfectly with the distinct pause to hear the kick in between. It almost feels like a mental illusion where the nothingness, it feels like the densest thing ever, when in fact it peaks high and trails of emptiness. That is the true trickery. One thing this track truly excels in is the creation of illusion and perceivable creation of audio space. To even hone something like this is beyond commendable. It is a real work of art to max out all the loudness characteristics in multiple kicks so nicely that they bounce off the limiter while giving adequate spacing for the melody to play at a high level. What a great track in a little bit of different ways. Alright, next song, Rest in Pieces. This track was put together with a great cohesion. Since the track is quite pristine and publishable without Warface going out of their way to cram this track full of goodies, notable by its way of trickling small supportive decorations to every corner, whether that is the amount of obscurely distorted synths that sound extraterrestrial, or the number of sharp cuts that are pinched fragments that are hard to even tell what they're originally composed out of. These minuscule subtleties are a great sign of chasing artistic excellence, and they add so much value once again to the track to have sort of random screechy effects everywhere trickled throughout. Lyrics for once facilitated a great melodic progression throughout, so you have those as an addition. I'm gonna butcher this name, but it felt like Irish Gosen's was quite a close in melodical harmony to reintroduction of the synths. This track's execution of vocals felt more rudimentary and well situated, rather than a odd dynamic where the vocals were being treated more of an afterthought, which is many cases causes a little bit of unparalleled sounds and energy that becomes a little bit across as off-putting. Gosen's had a stunning voice for such an aggressive track. It's not easy to recapture the energy from such a potent dance music, but her rage felt more touching than some of the Yuri's attempts on this record, and for once it kinda fits into place. The execution of Anticlimax is beyond world class on this song. It's almost as if anti-gravity was found sonically. Somewhat so vast, empty, associated with low energy, but this one seems like the inverse energy density, where the emptiness is actually what's extremely dense, and if you have a really small tick and then a lot of big space with a lot of, it's like sort of hollowed out with a very interesting reverb and distortion where you sort of get it pitched across, and then you sort of connect those in a very unified manner. It feels like the sort of emptiness in between that. It's like the inverse, where that is the thickest thing instead of actually the lowest thing. The sort of emptiness is manipulated to sound potently energetic. The Anticlimax kept on delivering by dropping filthy pausations and the tactical trickery in terms of the alterations to chop some notes and to come back with a clean panning on the fused bass notes from both sides. Sort of the alterations on the melody. Once again, I love the sort of nuance created by additional complexities in a track is what really gives me joy when listening to stuff. The final climax of the track is pure bass wall, as per usual. It's hard to tie such sound into words. It's something between zogs, gated kicks, laser kicks, rainbow kicks, color kicks, whatever word you want to pick out for such kicks. There's so many these days, I cannot even keep up with the actual scene itself anymore. Kick itself is very tail heavy, and it has this grimy old school resonance that is sharp and jagged around the edges appropriately. This track makes good use of arrhythmically unpredictable cuts and double ups to keep the mix very fluid. There's something to be said about the creation of such holistic audio experience with a very clear sections and dynamically harmfully fitting mastering. What I mean by such are the sort of connective bridges, the build-up phases compared to the anti-climax and climaxes, to their respective sound levels at the right sort of length ratios. That has to be within certain bounds for such music to be exhilarating and tolerable. That's what Warface actually got spot on this track. Such a fine art of balancing act doesn't come about from amateur experimentations, but it's more sort of years of devotedly pursuing your craft and actually excelling in that. And that's what Warface has done. Track Nothing to Lose. This track appeared to be a blessing in disguise, albeit it has a clear lack of contingency and singular theme. It still manages to eke out barely by scraping additionally found depth. A modicum element of surprise was the last climax, which gave a tasteful ending with the empty bass waves that were soothing the surf in metaphorically. I found that was thrilling to listen to, and I appeased my ears without adding unnecessary complexity this time. I found the lyrical output to be quite dull, and it was a little bit inauthentic energy again. This sort of distastefulness slightly diminishes the track's overall value. I am uncertain whether it was the lyrics themselves or the singer's tonality that felt particularly horrid. The ordinary elements were apparent, with loose handling of audible mix issues, lacking the attention to detail compared to other tracks on this record. This track has some irritable, itchy kicks that were a little bit too dry for my liking. Too much distortion, not enough bass. It sort of crossed the line of annoying for me a few times. In addition to this was the looping strange vocal chop with some odd chirping that was more of a distraction than a mighty execution. The final climax is genuinely redemptive, from convincingly executing the fake drop to the voluminous, well-fitting bass on the final climax of the track. That is a true delight. The way the fake drop is constructed makes a total U-turn in the energy without losing the massive drive of the ginormous kicks, which was facilitated by the sort of screaming words of "shut the fuck up," and then it seemingly in an all-out pitch lets the listener surf the massive creamy waves of bass just fucking sinking in there, and just it never stops, it never bottoms out. It's sort of a constant fluctuation of bass that is so soothing. In addition to this was the outstanding final climax. It has drizzled in a good amount of cuts and kick rolls to maximize the enjoyment out of this one. The soundstage is fantastic, with an insanely echoey claps chirping at the front end of the kicks with minimal presence of the synths. FX elements were tastefully added, setting the final climax apart from the rest of the track. And somehow, as I already said, sort of redeems it from like kind of the below average to like a little bit above average, I would say. Alright, next track, Satisfaction. To me, this track is a real gem. In fact, quite far from an average rave song with a lot of attachable bass and catchy lyrics. And old school kick characteristics drive home the uniqueness. But after the perceived climax that ended up being anticlimax, this track strays far from typical hardstyle formats with incredibly refreshing winds from different directions. When you actually think about it, the sort of different sounds are much needed in order to retain innovativeness, and which is incredibly refreshing and necessary to retain innovation, injecting much needed liveliness into the genre, lest it succumb to its complacency, which seemed to be a trajectory for previous years. But these days a lot of new kicks were found, like laser kicks, zogs, rainbow kicks, color kicks, whatever dual damage is doing, you know. The track's break proves vital in recapturing it, from the highs of the initial climax. The mid-intro on the second climax proves to be quite a treat. Reminiscent of the true old-school kicks show until the overly encompassing kicks come in and eat the entire stage for a dozen or so seconds. These striking kicks that were filled to the brim with bass showed off their stylistic embodiments in a similar fashion as in Taste the Blade. Overall, the track is quite far from dull. The choppiness and irregular cuts in the anticlimaxes and drops are easily noticeable, adding an unpredictability throughout. From triplet-esque chops to the odd pitch changes in the kicks, this track exhibits a swift progression transition between 5 and 10 seconds. So it never gets dull. Vastly differing stuff coming in and out all the time before the sort of next variation takes hold. A compelling aspect was the distinct drive that the track had. This is a very, very solid track on this record, and quite enjoyable in many ways. Next track, Control the Soul and Mutilator remix. This track exceeded in my expectations. I was aware of Mutilator's prowess, but to remix a previous release in such a transformative way demonstrates an extraordinary artistic ability to extract so much new quality from the bass song. The melody happens to be quite captivating and takes the listener by storm. In the first climax, Mutilator drops the hammer with the high beam kicks with thick tails of bass as a complementary. This then comes in with a few variations of the tails, particularly when assessing the kick. It is slower than others, having a prolonged form, which I like. It's like, doesn't always have to be 165 ppm plus. You can have sort of old school, sort of very sort of distinct notable kicks that are a little bit slower, and the kicks have to be very high quality in order to be a little bit slower, I would say. Kick mirrors the almost lightning fast initial intro. The melody is not world class and feels urgently chaotic in ways, while not a terrible detriment to the track's overall stature. It does detract slightly. The anticlimax kicks had too little drive to push above their own weight. Specifically, they were a little bit too long for what they brought to the table during the second climax. But these sort of pipe sounding ones were particularly uninspired. Lastly, the contrast between these two variations of anticlimactic kicks to the final climax kicks was minimal. They didn't provide a grandiosity expected for a final outing. The track would have vastly improved by slightly longer melodies and proper phasing on the anti-climaxes. In overall presence, the track's delivery on singularity and unity was a little bit lackluster, to say the least. On the brighter side, it differs from the other tracks on the record considerably. It adds more flavor of coloring to an already stacked record. Overall, a very great remix of a bass song that was already incredibly popular, so good stuff. Alright, next song, Dead End. This particular Riot Shift and Warface collaboration initially impressed me on the first listens. After dozens of replays, not a blockbuster hit, just because of the sheer amount of hype surrounding the album and the presence of other massive tracks on the record. Those things made this track slip a little bit through the cracks, perhaps a little bit half-baked in the studio. Upon closer inspection and reflection, it became apparent to me that this track has a lot of weak points, but somehow miraculously it redeems itself once again, partially in the final climax, as few other tracks have also done so far. I wasn't a big fan of the rock-like live elements on this track. They didn't seem to add anything worthwhile, and were a little bit more of a distraction to the track's melodic progression. The first climax's anti-climax was heavily influenced by Riot Shift's signature low-end, hollow, loopiness. That thud is enchanting the sort of emptied out, echoed anti-climax setting. However, the real climax kicks seemed almost like an afterthought, at least in their presence. They weren't even moderately intense in their presence. I would have way more preferred some big room-esque kicks with a slower BPM and a sharp high-end pitching, almost like in the Mutilator remix. The track's break felt a little bit jarring and almost forced. The energy notably drops too low for too long to make an adequate recovery in the pre-final climax. A couple of seconds before the climax peak, the song delivers a well-executed drop with muffled bass, leading briefly to well-EQ'd kicks, and then it ends with an alternatively resonant tail, which was rough around the edges, but not in a way that was pleasant. I truly believe that they could have made the final climax very lengthier, because that was almost the, almost the best part of the track, or the only enjoyable part of the track. Alright, the track, Come With Me. Come With Me initially seemed like an ordinary track, likely positioned towards the latter end of the album due to its lack of creativity on the melody. However, it marvelously kicks showcased in the final climax redeems the track yet again. Oh no. The kicks were surprising in many ways. They had very unique tactility that is not present in the same extent as in other tracks on the record. To me, quite inexplicitly, this reminds me of Harddriver's masterclass in harnessing fake drops with excellent drive. This is very apparent in the second climax's vocal chop of Dopamine, which is stunning, as striking effect of DJ Spin It Back, letting the sky strike lightning upon the listener with the aforementioned kicks. The real crescendo was the loudest kicks on the album, that perhaps the sheer accident hit the limit and a little bit past the 0 decibel limit. Because I went back in Reaper DAW software to actually see, they go +1. Absolutely amazing loudness, again, insane perceived loudness. A little bit almost too far to me with my desensitized hearing. Lovely. That is a very beautiful fake drop execution. Warface focused much of their attention outside of the melody, which was mediocre, full of holes, like a Swiss cheese. It's a little bit of a shame because the track had a lot of uncapitalized potential. A subpar melody lowers the shelf life of the track when conventionally it has been the main element of many tracks, as in EDM in general. It may be easy to state in hindsight, but who knows, maybe with a little bit more of a pristine melody, the sort of rash-inducing rebellious kicks would have become flatter in contrast. You never know what dynamically might change it. All in all, an itchy and irritable track turned out to be a decent listen. I wouldn't mind throwing this on an occasional gym workout playlist, even after the album's reception has been neglected and didn't pop out as much of the other tracks on the record. The earlier singles released and periodically played at festivals overshadowed this track. Open Your Eyes, Rage remix. I have to say, I love this track. I just actually love this track. One of the best raw hardstyle remixes that I've actually heard in 2023. The track has used every tool in its arsenal, from tacky, dry, anticlimactic kicks to drizzling in with laser kicks. Rage brought immaculate production and undoubtedly was a key contributor to trimming the edges of Warface's sound to make everything slightly more rounded and professional. Good to say that it gave a secondary voice and additional professionalism that most definitely has helped to craft this gem of a remix. From the get-go, dropping the extremely catchy melody with subtly integrated vocal bits to display the kicks to the brightest extent. Initially, I imagined that the first kicks were the real drop, but it was completely shocked by the impressive change after the fascinating window display of anticlimax kicks. What truly drives the track's beauty is the delightfully arrhythmically made cuts and chops and triplet formations that contribute to its artistic beauty. In addition to the kicks, is the chirping and pleasant synth produces a lot of drive and carves out the space to let the bass bounce on the limiter. It was a great decision to give the track a decently lengthy break. In adding significance to the second build of phasing, the final climax vastly differentiated from its predecessor. It's hard to say whether it had an anticlimax to enter. Nonetheless, the sort of sophisticatedly insane gated kicks brought the tactile, dry chirp side in the final climax. In the final climax, the triplets were ever so present. What was delightful about the final delivery was not to make a super noisy kick, but to actually respect the characteristics brought in the final climax. Rage's supreme mastering most likely contributed to how smooth the entire track felt throughout. Even during the potentially loud sections, where he remastered with the delicate hand, and it leaves enough room not to damage or crunch the other elements. Alright, the last track, Burn It Down. This track has all the characteristics of being the last song on the album. The sort of last-ditch, low-effort attempts to push out another track in the studio. The track's vocals sounded very odd, almost like they're out of an old-school MP3. I didn't know where to begin to critique this track. This one thing that stands out the most of the minimal amount of background lowering. It seems very empty without the pads or multi-layered lead synths. What was Warface thinking when releasing this creation almost without any sort of last climax build-up? Like, it's so lackluster in several ways. The track has little to no layering or side chaining. The kicks were just as flat as some female track runners. Okay, sorry about that. These kicks were tricky to even call hard, because they were hard to listen to. I feel like the entire track was masked with a lot of equalization to hide some of the mediocre interests that this kicks spark. With the dual mastering that this track has, it leaves the listener with a sense of distaste from the record. It could have been avoided so easily. Why are all artists like this? They want to actually buff out their track list on all the albums with a lot of trash. It's like, do you actually want to make something that stands the test of time? Or something that is pushed out in 5 months? If not even shorter time span. Like, actually make quality over quantity, but there's no going back with all these news rumors and Gen Alpha, I guess. The album could have been ended on somewhat of a high note, but greed and extending the track list got them to, well, albeit. Alright, that's that. The sun is shining bright in the afternoon, and overall, I would say it's a lovely record. And I could conclude this in many ways, but I'm just gonna read it off here. To conclude, the album has it all, from elements to be a fine standalone hardstyle record, albeit with a few sharp edges that poke out. With number of quality tracks that this record boasts, I would rate this album a solid 8, if not 8.5. Many tracks felt a little too rushed and cramped, but it didn't take away from the clear gems that this album has also covered. The album will be a benchmark of raw style album whose essence has already been captured, for example D-sturb's or perhaps Tyrone's album, and now, when recording this, Harddriver's Sensation album. Regardless, I and many others will be patiently waiting where we stand in a few years and where the direction of Warface will guide his future sound. We seemingly haven't peaked, and the journey will only get harder from here. Anyway, it has been quite a pleasure. Yours truly, Fico. If you liked it, subscribe for more random videos, because this channel is a little bit of a mess in the turmoil. But yeah, sorry for reading off the script, but I don't know, I have a very hard time timing my own words. Do not get confused. So yeah, later guys.